Welcome everyone to the Ontario Caregiver Organization's webinar series. These webinars bring together caregivers and subject matter experts to explore topics of interest to caregivers. We do this to support and engage chosen family, friends, neighbors, really anyone who's caring for someone else. My name is Katie Muirhead, and I'm going to be your moderator for today. We begin this gathering by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we're on today. And while we meet on a virtual platform with people joining us from across the province, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the land which we each call home. The land that I'm standing on is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and acknowledging this reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendships of Indigenous people. As team members at OCO, we are learning about the lands from which we work and exploring how we can be meaningful allies and how we can support the recommendations from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. We invite you to take a moment to reflect on the land where you are. And if you're not familiar with that, we will be sharing an interactive map that tells you which traditional territory your city or town sits on. And you can find that at native-land.ca. Our webinar today is called The Changing Brain, Exploring Personality and Behavior Change with Dementia. Changes in personality and behavior are common symptoms for people living with dementia. In today's webinar, we're joined by Dawn Hanna, the Education and Knowledge Translation Coordinator from the Alzheimer's Society of Ontario and knowledge broker with Brain Exchange. Dawn will explore the changes caused by dementia and include ways to better understand those behavior changes and their impact on caregivers. We'll also learn more about the You First for Care Partners program that provides training for family and friends who are supporting someone with behavior changes as a result of dementia. Welcome, Dawn.
Thanks, Katie. And thank you, everyone, for joining. It was great to see you complete the polls because it's always beneficial as a facilitator to know who your audience is. January is Alzheimer's Awareness Month. And so for many of you, you may be aware of that or you may not be aware of that. And I appreciate that the Ontario Caregiver Organization has taken or organized this webinar to be able to further provide education and knowledge around living with dementia, with Alzheimer's disease, but really all related dementias. So I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule, knowing that you're a caregiver, whether that's an unpaid or a paid caregiver, to be here today. I encourage you to, and I saw in the chat that some people were saying they wanted to know whether it was recorded to be able to share with others. And I do encourage you to do that. Share that information with your family members, with your friends, because the more that we know and understand dementia, the better it is for people who are living with dementia. So today I'm going to talk about the changing brain. We're going to explore personality and behavior changes with dementia. So the objectives of today's session is to, again, understand. I'm putting an emphasis on the understanding part. So we will dive into what causes behavior changes, specifically for people who are living with dementia. We're going to talk about the impact on caregivers. And I put an asterisk beside caregivers because there's different terms used for caregivers. At the Alzheimer's Society, we tend to call our caregivers care partners. And I recognize the Ontario Caregiver Organization uses caregivers. So I will try and use use caregivers primarily, but I may slip and use care partners, but I'm still referring to anyone who's involved in the care of someone who's living with dementia. And then at the end, I'm going to talk about the resources and services that are available to you as a caregiver, or perhaps a person who's living with dementia, to access in your own community. So starting off, I'd like you to sit back and relax and as we start the presentation, and think about a time when you were trying to find your way in an unfamiliar place without a map. Perhaps it's a new community you had just moved to. Perhaps you're on vacation and in a new country and you can't find your way. Think about how you feel. What emotions did you feel? And I encourage you, if you're comfortable in being interactive, using the chat as well, and I will monitor that. But think about perhaps your feelings of what it was like to not know where you are, knowing that you have a destination in mind that you need to get to. Perhaps you just arrived in a new country and looking for your hotel or a place that you need to be. What did you feel? And I see some great emotions coming through on the chat. So disoriented, worried, having to rely on locals for directions, overwhelmed, panicked, stressed. So lots of negative emotions or not a positive way to start off perhaps your vacation. Next, I want you to think about, what did you do? So someone commented, didn't know language, confused or scared. What did you do to try and find the directions or try to get help? Worked with others I was with, asked others for help, asked for help. Excellent. Googled, buy a map, find a trustworthy person for directions and help. Excellent. I'm going to take you to the next scenario. And now I want you to think about when you felt disrespected or felt that people weren't listening to you. Again, what emotions did you feel? Angry, frustration, disappointment, sad, isolated, anxious. Lots of emotions here. Hurt, depressed. And what did you do? Withdrew, walked away, shut down, asked someone, could not understand the response, withdrawal, lashed out, cried, asked for help. Excellent. So lots of emotions that come from either situations or how we're feeling. And I want that to set the tone for today of understanding all behavior has meaning. The way we react to situations, scenarios, it might be a one-off, but it could be something that we experience on a regular basis. Our emotions come bubbling up. And I want you to think about the person who's living with dementia. How do they communicate? How do they show their emotions? How do they behave? But in order to understand changes in behavior, we need to understand dementia. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, but I think it's really important that it's the foundation of trying to understand behavior. Dementia is an umbrella term that describes a set of symptoms that a person may experience. So we often think of memory loss or memory changes, but it could also bring other symptoms like changes in language. The person could struggle with familiar tasks. The symptoms may be impacting their day-to-day function. They may struggle with executive functioning. Having to do tasks that involved a lot of steps may become challenging. And so dementia is what we call an umbrella term. It's the description of symptoms. It's not a diagnosis. The diagnosis of the different types of dementia is the more common ones are listed on the screen. So Alzheimer's disease is the most common and it's the most prevalent. So 60 to 80% of people are diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And that generally affects the short-term memory first. Often long-term memory stays intact further into the disease progression. Vascular dementia is caused by strokes. So you may find it's a sudden onset, and a person can have more than one type of dementia. They may have a mixed dementia. Lewy body dementia is more of the brain-body connection. So it's often for someone who's living with Lewy body, they may notice the physical changes. So stiff muscles, rigidity, they may have tremors. You may notice shuffling. They may have memory challenges as well. Language, reasoning may be a challenge. Frontal temporal dementia, depending on, again, which part of the brain has been impacted. For someone who's living with frontal temporal dementia, you may find that they struggle with communication. Their behavior may be more pronounced. They may get upset easily. Sometimes that filter's not there. Again, with communication, they may be able to know what they want to say, but the words aren't coming out. So you can see with the different types of dementia and the impact it has on the person can be very individualized, and depending on what type of dementia it is, has its own kind of set of symptoms. I've listed the 4 most common types of dementia here, but there's actually estimated to be over 90 different types of dementia. And so now I want to talk about the changes in mood and behavior. So what may you be seeing in someone who's living with dementia that has changed? So their emotions, their moods, and their behaviors may change rapidly. You may find that they can be happy and calm, and then something may be said or something may be done, and that changes their mood rapidly. Changes are sometimes in how the person experiences their surroundings. So when we did the exercise at the beginning of being in an unfamiliar place, use that same analogy for someone who is not recognizing perhaps the people that are around them or the place that they're in. The environment may not be familiar to them. It may be where they have lived for the last 20 years, but it may not be as familiar to them as it was. So the environment, there's a lot of factors, and we'll get into some of those things to consider that can cause us to have an emotional response. It can cause us for our moods to change, our emotions to change, and our behaviors to change. What you may notice in changes in personality is the person may become confused. They may be trying to make sense of their world. They may be trying to understand what they need to do next. And that can be day-to-day activities. Getting dressed may become a challenge. What order do I put my pants on? How do I put my shoes on? You may notice they become angry. So things that would never have bothered them before may upset them. They may become suspicious. They may question, who are you calling? Who's at the door? They may become fearful. So the world starts becoming not familiar or comfortable to them, and they may start having fear of their own environment, or things that they've always experienced may become not as calming or enjoyable anymore. And they may withdraw. They may not want to participate in activities. They may have been, involved in sports or cards or faith communities, and now they don't want to participate or go to those activities anymore. And these are all changes in personality. And I want to use the analogy of this iceberg, because behavior is very similar to this iceberg. We only see at the surface and above what's there, but it's very vast below. And there's a lot of reasons, a lot of things that are happening behind the scenes. For someone who's living with dementias, we can't see what's happening within the brain. We only see the symptoms of it. So you may see those behavior changes. And so we really want to understand that full iceberg. We want to understand deep what is causing the behavior that we're seeing on the surface. and to remember that all behavior has meaning. This is an important part of really understanding behavior, is that the person is trying to communicate or tell me something. And it's my job as a caregiver or the people who surround the individual to try and figure it out, because the person living with dementia may not be able to tell you. They may not be able to explain how they're feeling, what is upsetting for them, what's bothering them. And so as caregivers, you wear a lot of different hats, and being that investigator and having that investigator hat on is another hat to wear. But it's really important, in order to understand behavior, is that we do have to pull all those layers away. We have to try and understand, what is the person trying to tell me? So some of the common behaviors that you may have noticed in the person living with dementia who's in your life is that they may be losing their way or searching or exploring. And this is can be a safety risk, because if the person does go missing or doesn't recognize their community and perhaps they're out for a walk, the risk of going missing is great. So 3 out of 5 people living with dementia will go missing. And so it's really important that safety planning is done ahead of time, that you look for some of those cues that the person may not be recognizing their community or their environment like they were at one time, putting safety measures in place so that the person can still be independent and active, because we don't want to take that away, but we want to make sure it's done in a safe manner. You may notice that they may be experiencing feelings of anxiousness or restless behavior. They may be tapping their fingers when they're anxious. They may get up and walk away. They may leave the room. They may leave the house if they're feeling anxious. You may notice that there's some suspicion or some delusion or false beliefs. Are they telling you that they're hearing perhaps children playing, or that they are seeing someone that's not there? Has the sexual behavior changed? Do you find that they're making more reference to sexuality? Is there inappropriate action? And this can all be part of the behavior changes that you may be noticing. The person may have physical or verbal outbursts. So what they're trying to communicate maybe isn't coming out in words, but in actions. Or maybe they are raising their voice to share something with you. So again, behavior is a communication method as well. So I encourage you to pause and reflect. And I think this is an important point in the presentation, because I want you to think about someone in your life who's living with dementia. Perhaps it's your spouse, your parent, your neighbor, your friend, or someone that is your client or your patient. And think about the behavior that you are seeing. What are some of the changes that you have noticed? And I do want to say, not all behavior is negative. Sometimes behavior can be positive as well. So stop and think about what you're noticing, or what are some of the concerns that you maybe have noticed in the person living with dementia. And I know it can be very complex, and I'm hoping in the short hour, and I wish we had a lot more time to be able to dive in, but I'll give you some tips and strategies and supports that can support you before the end of the presentation. But I want you to start thinking about all those reasons for behavior. And as we go through the next few slides, I'll ask some reflective questions of you, and to think about the behavior and what are you seeing. It can be complex, it can be overwhelming, and there might be multiple behaviors that you're noticing. And I want to start by introducing our You First for Care Partners. This is a program that the Alzheimer's Societies offer, and it's a framework. So it allows care partners to work through what can be challenging behaviors to try and better understand and to support a person who's living with dementia. As I go through this, typically this course is 6 hours. And so obviously I have a short period of time, but I'm hoping I'll just skim the surface to give you a bit of understanding of the information, that the content that's in the program, but also for you to start thinking about your own situation and your own, the person living with dementia, to maybe have a different view on the behavior. And so part of the You First was actually developed many years ago for professional caregivers. So we have delivered this course throughout Canada, and it started to give the tools to staff, frontline staff, to be able to understand and support people who are living with dementia. And there was such a need for it for care partners, because care partners need to be getting the same training, to be able to talk the same language. But there are also tools that care partners can use. They're practical tools that care partners can use to be able to work through changes in behavior. And so through the You First program, as I mentioned, it's 6 hours. You get a workbook and you get a wheel, and the wheel example is on the right of your screen, that you can work through behaviors, and so that you're not missing anything. It takes a holistic approach to understanding behavior. And the number one part of this is the understanding. So as you can tell, we use an acronym, the You First. Each letter represents a different part of the framework. And there's actually a few different acronyms that I'll go through that we use as part of the You First for Care Partners framework. But understanding starts with us as care partners, to understand, what is the person trying to tell me? What are all of the possible reasons for behavior? And so we spend a lot of time in the course going through the understanding, because it's not about the person living with dementia understanding. It's about us as care partners to understand, so that we can try strategies and support the person living with dementia. So understanding is that all behavior has meaning. We start again by looking at the whole person. On the next slide, I'll go into a little bit of the PIECES framework, but understanding incorporates that PIECES understanding, that we're not missing anything that could be causing the behavior. This is really the foundation of supporting people living with dementia who are experiencing behaviors. The next part is flagging. So once we've understood all the possible reasons, is then we want to consider flagging. So what exactly are we looking for? What has changed with the person? Is this something new? When did it start? So flagging is really important, because it identifies of what has changed. What is happening to the individual? What do I need to focus on? And because understanding behavior can be very complex and can be multifaceted, there might be lots of reasons, is that the flagging allows us to focus on priorities. So anything that has to do with safety is a priority. Then we look at interactions. So during interactions, as we think about, how are we interacting with the person living with dementia? What's my verbal and my nonverbal communication with the person? Am I trying to look at the world through the person living with dementia's eyes? How am I interacting with other people involved in his care? Perhaps your children, your neighbors, the PSW, the retirement home staff. Because interactions are really important, that communication piece. So I may have a piece of information that is very vital, that is a piece of understanding why a behavior is happening. But if the PSW doesn't know that information, or my daughter doesn't know and she's coming to visit, then that information needs to be passed on to ensure that support is provided, and that the individual is not feeling that stress of always having to experience that behavior. Reflection and reporting is an opportunity to take all of the information that you have and to think about it. And who do I need to tell? Who do I need to share that information with? And then we can start looking at support. So how do we support the individual with this behavior? What do I need to do differently, or what do I need to continue to do to be able to support them? And the last part is team. And this is an important piece as a caregiver, because you're not alone in this journey. You do have team members. And one of the exercises that we do in the You First for Care Partners is we talk about who's on your team. And I encourage you, maybe after today's session, is to jot down all the people who are on your team. Sometimes we feel like we're the only care partner, or we're the only person involved in the care. But is there anyone else that you can count on? Perhaps it's that friend that, checks in every couple of weeks by phone. They're part of your team because they're helping take care of you. Think about perhaps your adult children, your neighbor, former coworkers, anybody who's involved in the person living with dementia. They can hold key pieces of information or observations, but they can also help support you as a team. One of our recent sessions we did when we were doing the exercise with team is one of our caregivers had shared with us that he doesn't have any team members. His children don't live close. His wife goes to an adult day program. And so when we started to talk about who is on his team, talking about even though his kids are not living close to him, he does rely on them by phone to help support him. The other thing is he realizes that his adult children who are not living close can assist in other ways. So they were going to start doing some calling for him. So if he was looking into other supports and services, that he was putting them in charge of doing the research. When we talked about the adult day program, he didn't realize the line of communication that he had with a team of experts who were supporting his wife 3 times a week. And so he asked to set up a meeting with the adult day program staff to share their insight into the behaviors that his wife may be experiencing during the adult day program. And it turned into a very engaged dialogue with him, that at the end, he had more knowledge and he shared knowledge with the adult day program staff, but he no longer felt like he was the only team member. And so I encourage you to find out your team members. And if you don't have a team member, the Alzheimer's Society is a great team member, and I'll share our contact information at the end. So as part of the understanding is another part of the framework, or what's called PIECES. So you may have heard PIECES reference, and this is used by clinical staff to understand changes in behavior. So you may have had a social worker or a nurse go through the PIECES assessments with you. And so again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through it, because we spend in the courses, we spend probably 2 hours just going through PIECES framework. But I did just want to give you a high level again to start thinking about the person who's living with dementia. Think about the physical needs. So looking at the person is probably not just living with dementia. They may have other physical needs or physical conditions that they're also living with. That in turn means they may be taking medication. And so the side effects sometimes from medications can cause some symptoms. So that may be contributing to behavior changes. Think about their vision or their hearing. Can they hear you okay? Can they see you okay? Is their prescription for their glasses up to date? Are they wearing their hearing aids properly? Are they using mobility aids properly? So there's a lot around the physical part that could be causing behavior. Are they in pain? And if the person living with dementia cannot tell you they're in pain, you may see that coming out in other ways. So there may be, they may be pulling at, if they're having pain in their lower body, they may be rubbing it, or they may be pulling at, or they may be yelling out to tell you. And I want to say, never assume anything. Ask the individual if they are experiencing pain. Never overlook that they can't give you the answers to these questions either. So looking at intellectual, there's lots of changes with memory. If they're living with a type of dementia, we want to obviously be aware of that and the symptoms that come with that. The other thing we dive into in the You First framework is we talk about the losses of dementia, and it's referred to as the 8 A's. I'll quickly go down. So there's amnesia, which is memory loss, aphasia, which is a loss of language or changes in language, agnosia, which is a loss of ability to recognize objects, apraxia, which is loss of purposeful movement, agnosia, so that loss of awareness. So sometimes it can be confused with that they're in denial, but they may not be in denial. If the brain is not capable of processing the information that they're living with a type of dementia, they may have agnosia. So it's that loss of awareness. Altered perceptions is they may be misinterpreting their world. Apathy, they may have lost motivation and attention deficits. So the loss of ability to keep or to shift attention. And so a lot of losses can happen. A person may not have all of those losses, but those are factors you want to also take into consideration when you're thinking about changes in behavior. Looking at emotions. So how is the person feeling? Have things changed in their life? Have they experienced losses? Have they moved to a different place? We want to also look at capabilities. So what have they lost in regards to capabilities? But also taking into account, what do they still have? And are we building on those capabilities? Because it's use it or lose it. If they're still able to participate and assist you, encourage them to do that. So if it's, if they've enjoyed baking, still involve them in those activities they've always loved. Capabilities is a really important one because oftentimes a confidence is lost. And so building the person up by involving them, asking them, giving them tasks to do is really important. Looking at the environment. So what is the environment like? I know my room right now is really warm. And so I'm getting a bit uncomfortable. Is the environment, looking at, is it too cold? Is it too hot? Is it too loud? Is it too quiet? All of those factors influence our behavior. And again, back to our activity we did at the beginning, the environment of an unfamiliar environment can cause us changes in our behavior or changes in our emotions. And we want to look at social as well. So taking into account their social, who have they been involved in? Do they have friends? Are the friends still coming to visit? Is family coming to visit? They may enjoy one-on-one visits rather than a large group. So at holidays, our family members coming perhaps in smaller groups as opposed to larger groups. And we used to do this with my grandmother. She became very overwhelmed with, she loved to see the kids and the grandchildren, but she found it very overwhelming to follow conversations. So then we started splitting up the holidays so that we would take an hour or two throughout over the holidays so that she could have one-on-one conversations. So thinking about the social. We also want to think about their cultural heritage. So are they still participating in eating the cultural foods and participating in traditions that they were participating in before? So as you can see, I'm just skimming the surface on the Pieces framework, which is part of the You First framework. There's a lot to dive into, but there's a lot of things that we don't want to miss either. And that's really the goal of going through the framework is, am I missing anything that could be causing this behavior? And so I wanted to share with you some quotes from past participants. So these are care partners who participated in our You First for Care Partners. And so one caregiver shared with us, "It has given me more confidence as a primary caregiver to face new challenges as my mother-in-law's Alzheimer's progresses. And another participant shared ability to communicate more with the care team. I learned some strategies that I have been able to put into practice, a better two-way communication. And I received a written quote from a care partner who participated as well. And I really found this really summarizes the value of the You First for Care Partners program. So the Barton family has provided sponsorship to the You First for Care Partner program. So at this point, there is no fee for attending the program. And so she shared with us, I had the benefit of taking the You First program in December 2020. I found it vitally important to do my best to give my mom a better quality of life during her Alzheimer's journey. I am her primary caregiver beyond her retirement home. To have better tools to problem solve and to communicate with her will make a difference, and after 3 weeks already has. I realize that issues are escalated quickly by my lack of knowledge, not because of her Alzheimer's. It has changed my approach significantly, and I must say in a very positive direction. I was trying, I was frustrated, afraid, and knew what I was doing was not helping. Now armed with these very logical and accessible protocols, I know that I'm able to last longer. I was fraying at the edges, and therefore my dear mother will be, I hope, happier and definitely safer in mind and body. The generosity of the Burton family is profoundly impactful. Alzheimer's, it feels that I am witnessing my mother's death twice. At times I am gutted. I am also paralyzed by mom's profound clarity and then complete disability showing as a lack of memory to care for herself. This You First program is clearly laid out to provide tools that build on each other. The wheel will be a handy reference and the booklet is precise and just deep enough to help me figure out how to apply the wisdom. I think the workbook will become a living document for me, like a recipe folder, full of rich family recipes, the recipe to navigate a cruel disease. From the bottom of my heart, I thank you, Burton family. You have changed my world and therefore my mother's. So I think that goes to show you the impact that having knowledge and taking workshops like the You First for Care Partners really gives you the tools to be able to support the person living with dementia. It allows you to reflect on your own situation, to connect with others, and most importantly, to work on understanding and supporting the person in your life who is living with dementia. So the local Alzheimer's societies are here to help. So the You First for Care Partners program is just one of the programs that they offer. I encourage you to reach out to your local office and find out what programs they have. Inquire if they have the You First for Care Partners program, or they may have another program that does discuss changes in behavior. Knowledge is power, and by gaining this education, you're starting on that journey to further understand and how to support. I'm always impressed with caregivers who come to our training, because you're supporting someone 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You know, as healthcare professionals, we take courses, we go to trainings, we learn about how to support a resident or a patient living with dementia. But it's not a mandatory course that you take as a caregiver when you walk out of the doctor's office. And I encourage you to take advantage of the programs that are available to you. There's lots of programs at the Alzheimer's Society. You First for Care Partners is just one example, but please reach out. Not only is the education there, but the support is also there. You'll be able to also, if you wish, to join with other caregivers who are going through similar journeys. There's lots of opportunity to join support groups, to speak one-on-one with counselors, to get resources, to join education sessions, and there's no fee for it. So I encourage you to reach out. I've also included our email address at the bottom of the screen. So if if you're not able to reach your local society, or you have any problems in navigating that, feel free to send an email and we will help get you connected to your local society. Excellent. So just as a
Wonderful.
final wrap up, I just want to share that all behavior has meaning. It can be complex and it can be overwhelming, but know that you are not alone. There's many people in this virtual room today. The Ontario Caregiver Organization is here to help guide you. The Alzheimer's Societies are here to guide you. And there's lots of resources, information, support in your local community as well. We know that understanding behavior can be very complex, and we will help walk you through and understand that. I encourage you to keep learning, and as I've said, knowledge is power. So I'm going to turn it over now to Katie for some question and answers.
Great. Thank you so much, Dawn. I so appreciate you spending some time with our group today and sharing a lot more about what the Alzheimer's Society can offer and the You First program. So we do have time for questions, and boy, has our chat box been active. So this is wonderful. And I want to again thank all of the folks that have joined us for participating, sharing your experiences, giving some tips and tricks of your own to the folks that are joining, and asking lots of really wonderful questions. I'm going to do my best now to go through some of these questions and get to as many as we can. But as a reminder for folks, the recording and the slides will be sent to you. Okay, so after today's webinar, we're going to do what we do behind the scenes, and you will receive an email that will contain the recording and the slides that Dawn has shared. So you can refer back to that anytime you want, or pass that along to anyone you think might benefit from it. So I'm going to go back to the beginning of the talk and try to work through some of those questions. One of the first questions that did come in, Dawn, is, can you have two different types of dementia at the same time?
Yes, you can. So what we often refer to as mixed dementia, so having more than one. So yes, a person can have more than one.
Mm-hmm. And I think I heard you say there's about 90 different types now that they've identified.
There is estimated at over 90 different types. So you can see how complex getting a diagnosis sometimes is, depending upon the symptoms, and your doctor. What your doctor's really trying to do is be an investigator to identify the symptoms that the person living with dementia is experiencing, and then trying to diagnose where does that fit into, and may send you for exams and tests to further identify.
So we did have a couple of questions come in from folks that are navigating the system, which can be tricky sometimes, and I'm trying to advocate for their loved ones who are maybe don't have that diagnosis but are showing those signs. So is there sort of can you suggest sort of a stepwise process for folks if they're concerned about their loved one demonstrating possibly signs of dementia, or we've had a question come in around like other neurocognitive challenges? Like, do you have sort of a recommended sort of step or plan of action that those supporting them could sort of walk through?
Yeah, so starting with the warning signs, there is a 10 warning signs, which I can share as a resource as well following the webinar. The number one is to talk to the doctor, talk to your healthcare professional, whether that's your nurse practitioner, and if you have a doctor, starting that conversation. Sometimes that is difficult to do because perhaps the person who is experiencing the changes may not recognize or may not to state that. So starting there, and even if it's your doctor can't give caregivers information, access to information, but if you're concerned, even just reaching out to your doctor, to the person's doctor, and giving them a heads up that maybe the next time they're in, they can ask some probing questions. So it's not breaching the privacy, because it's you're just probing that or suggesting that, but hopefully that will lead to some conversation. The other thing, again, is reaching out to the Alzheimer's Society, because every area is different in the resources that they have. So some have I know in my area we have GAIN teams, Geriatric Assessment Intervention Network teams, but that's not across the board. So I encourage you to, again, reach out to the Alzheimer's Society if you're not sure where to turn in your community, and they are a wealth of knowledge and will be happy to direct you.
That's great. That's really helpful. I know that capacity and consent, the privacy rules can be really tricky and challenging for folks, especially if your loved one is not letting you join those appointments or contribute during those appointments. So definitely a frustrating situation, but it's good to know that you can still also approach the Alzheimer's Society, even if you have questions or without a formal diagnosis, to get some really clear direction in your own community around how you can support that person that you have some concerns on. So that's really great to know. We did have a question around the You First program and how to sign up. And I don't know, we did share that email address that you shared at the end of the slides. I'm also wondering, would First Link through the Alzheimer's Society be a great place for folks to start if they have questions about You First or any of the other supports that are available?
Absolutely. So First Link is your first link to your local Alzheimer's Society. So reaching out to them and asking about the You First for Care Partners program, or if they have any other programs, because there is other of our First Link learning series that also incorporates understanding behavior into that. I also encourage you to take a dementia awareness, find out if there's any sessions around dementia awareness, and starting with that understanding, building on that. Going through First Link is your first step to make, and they will open up doors for you based on your needs. So it's they're a wonderful resource that tap into. That's what they're there for, and they're knowledgeable and supportive. Great teams.
Wonderful. That's really helpful. I know the Alzheimer's societies across the province offer so many different resources, not only for the person living with dementia, but also the care partner. And we had a lot of comments come through around that feeling of isolation. When you were talking about looking for your team, you know, some folks chimed in and said, I am my team. For caregivers, a lot of the times it is only them and they don't have that informal support. So and then that other piece around the friendships or the family members that aren't connected directly don't always really get it. They don't always understand. And so they don't always know how to respond or support. And I think the Alzheimer's Society, what they also do is offer so many great care partner programs where you can go and get that connection with other care partners and feel seen and be able to talk about things. And they say, yeah, me too. I get it. Dad's not answering, dad's not communicating, responsive behaviors, confabulation, whatever the case may be.
Absolutely. And that peer-to-peer is so powerful, because they're going through it or have been through it. And at our support groups, you have a variety of people who have, are just starting on the journey, who have been caregiving for 10 years. And even in our virtual room today, I noticed 20% of our caregivers have been caregiving for 10 plus years. So connecting with someone who can say, I get that, or I understand, or, this is what I tried, or just to even, have that shoulder to cry on. That is really what it's about, is finding, if you don't have your own team, finding the team. And they're in each Alzheimer's Society who have welcome arms to bring you in and support you through it.
We had a number of questions come in around communication. So specifically individuals who might have aphasia or some communication challenges and not be able to express themselves or understand. And some of the questions that came in around that were, do you have tips or strategies on how to engage somebody who may have limited communication skills?
Yeah, excellent. So I think, everybody's individual. I'll kind of give a general answer, but using, they're called PIC symbols. So they're little pictures that can be used. And I got a great resource from a speech and language pathologist who supports people with aphasia, and she had printable. You can probably find them online, but that can help so that if the person is trying to communicate how they're feeling, there was a page just on emotions. There was the days of the week, the months. So the care partner put it into a binder and was using that as an example. Writing it down, so having maybe a whiteboard or a notebook that they can use. Even just pointing and using other nonverbal cues. And one of our care partners shared that she often says it's like charades, like trying to use the nonverbal, hand gestures and so forth. Again, the Alzheimer's Society can help direct to local resources, whether that's a speech and language pathologist in your community that specializes in aphasia, or even just giving you some examples of what may work. And it's trial and error. Sometimes it takes some getting used to. It might not be the best fit, but that's okay. Try something new the next time, and you'll find, hopefully you'll find something that will work for both of you. Communication is so important. We think of how many times we use communication throughout the day. And when you can't tell someone how you're feeling or what you're experiencing, how isolating can that be? So, some easy tips to help and strategies is so valuable.
Sort of building on that comment around that, the person with dementia withdrawing, feeling sad, isolating. We had some comments and questions around that too, where these are their experiences, and you're noticing as a caregiver or a care partner that the person you're supporting is really, their mental health appears to be declining. And I'm wondering if you have any tips or strategies on how, as a care partner or caregiver, you can help to improve quality of life, knowing that, this is more of a maintenance piece and there's going to likely be degeneration that's happening. But as we're supporting these individuals, are there strategies to improve overall quality of life as folks are going through this?
Yeah, I think it starts really looking at, again, that understanding. So what did they like to do before? What did they, is there perhaps people or activities they like to do? Reaching out, to your local senior center, for example, finding out. I know we work very closely with our local senior center to have dementia-friendly cards, because a lot of our clients enjoyed still playing, euchre, but were frustrated or felt the pressure of having to put the right card down or the time. So, so what they did was had smaller groups, quieter place that was more suited. It wasn't called a dementia-friendly card game. I think it was called a slower pace, or there was just a different name to it, so that it's not just people who are living with dementia. I think it's starting with what did they enjoy in the past, because that's often a leading cue to what can you try and implement, and then finding that place, or again, reaching out to the Alzheimer's Society, joining programs. We have Minds in Motion. We have, different early stage programming for people who are living with dementia. Finding your place. And it's amazing where those spiral from there. There's other programs that encourage getting back in the community and participating. There's such a, so many opportunities. It's just finding the right fit. And sometimes it takes that encouragement. I remember one spouse always said, it was always hard to get out the door, but once they got into the office, he had a great time. It was that, it's just finding that. And sometimes that's the challenging part, is getting that. So can someone come and visit, and have a one-on-one? Is it, picking up the phone and talking to someone? It's hard, because that's a part of that, is that apathy, right? Of not wanting to participate. So how do you, sometimes making it just part of the routine, it's on the calendar. Today we're going to go here, or maybe it's just to go for a walk, or go to sit at the mall and just watch people. And start with the small steps, and celebrate those successes. When you celebrate, let's go for a coffee after, or whatever it may be.
And I know too, a lot of local public libraries also have dementia-friendly kits and other resources that you can take out for free and try with your person at home if they don't want to leave. There's those options too, and also Alzheimer's societies have lending libraries and all kinds of wonderful things. So trying it, maybe if it doesn't work, maybe putting it on the proverbial shelf and trying it again in a little while. Music is a wonderful tool. So it's just, that's part of the challenge as a caregiver, is you're also sort of that recreation therapist too, and you're trying to navigate and figure out how to keep folks engaged through the process. I'm noticing we're getting close to time, but we had a question around the You First program, and if you get a certification or certificate of completion for doing that, is that something that happens when you're done taking You First?
Yes, you do get a certificate of completion when it's finished. So absolutely. And you get the
Wonderful.
workbook and the wheel as well. So you leave with some great resources.
That's wonderful. That's good to know. It's nice to have things to take away and reflect on, and know that all of your dedication and hard work sort of amounted to this extra knowledge and a certificate of completion. I apologize to folks. We are not going to get to all of your questions, but as a reminder, the recording and the slides and the resources that Dawn has will get sent out to folks. We have other recordings on our YouTube channel around delirium and the 8 A's of dementia from last year. Folks want to go back and watch some of that if they're hungry for more. But I do want to thank everyone for taking the time today. And Dawn, I want to thank you for, again, joining us and sharing all of this wonderful information, all of these tips and strategies and resources that are available to folks across the province. It is truly very, very helpful and supportive for all of us to get together and exchange some knowledge and learn a little from each other. So thank you so much.